Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I'm Deepak, joining you from India and excited to host today's episode. It's truly pleasure to have Dr. Winnie Jiang joins us as our distinguished guest on today's episode. Dr. Winnie Jiang served as an assistant professor of organizational behavior and the Goltz Fellowship in Business and Society at INSEAD. Dr. Winnie is a scholar whose work dwells into how individuals create, sustain, and evolve meaning in their professional lives, especially during times of disruption, transition, and technological transformation. Her research draws attention to the human side of work, examining how people respond to change and how organizations can cultivate environments that uphold agency, dignity, and purpose. At the heart of her current research lies a compelling question: how can artificial intelligence be meaningfully integrated into our work lives to enhance rather than diminish the sense of purpose individuals derive from what they do? Across qualitative and quantitative studies, she explores how humans and intelligence systems can co-develop ways of working that preserve what is quintessentially human in the workplace. Dr. Winnie's broader research views together three interconnected themes: the dynamics of meaning making at work, career mobility, and self transformation, and the evolving notion of meaningful work in the digital age. Her studies on polling, career transition, and professional development offer both academic insights and practical implications for modern organizations. Her work has appeared in top-tier journals, including Administrative Science Quarterly, Academy of Management Journal, and Organizational Science. Dr. Winnie earned her PhD in Management from Yale University. Today, Dr. Winnie Chiang joins us to discuss her research, Breaking Free or Locking In: How Socially Disadvantaged Individuals Achieve or Reject an Aspired Identity in an Entrepreneurial Context, which investigates how people pursue or forego an aspired identity when it conflicts with their existing identities. Let's not keep you waiting. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Winnie Chiang to the podcast. Professor Winnie, we deeply appreciate your gracious acceptance of our invitation. It's an honor and privilege to host you today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the very generous introduction and for having me here and also your interest in my research.
Thank you. Professor, how do you define aspired and existing identities? And what types of conflict emerge most prominently in your study?
Sure. So in this particular research where we look at women in rural parts of China, actually, who come from rural parts of China and who get this opportunity to become entrepreneurs, for them, aspire identities are what they really want to become or they sort of dream about becoming. And this particular context is the identity of being a business owner, or in Mandarin Chinese is called 老板 in their own words, which symbolize autonomy, respect, higher status, higher power in some sense too, and a better future for this population. And on the other hand, the existing identities they have are the identities who they hold that are strongly associated with here being women from rural parts of China and low socioeconomic status backgrounds with limited education. Many of them graduated from middle school and then, went to work straight in the cities. And with also heavy family obligations. So these identities are what they currently hold and what they sort of feel that have constrained them in some way to pursue something big. That's their aspire identity. Yeah. And the most prominent conflict to the second part of your question that we observe in this particular context is not really about role overload or time or a sense of, oh, I cannot do it all, have it all, the sort of a sense of conflict that many sort of working or professional working mothers have, right, in sort of navigating the conflict of demands between work and family. That's not necessarily the case, although it has some of it. But primarily it's the meaning-based identity conflicts that's very salient in this context. Many women felt that who they were, which is, a rural girl, not very well educated, this sort of identity fundamentally contradicted who entrepreneurs in their mind are supposed to be. So this perceived incompatibility generated a deep sense of internal obstacles such as fear of failure, shame, self-doubts, and even when external resources are provided to them. So yeah, that's a very sort of detailed answer to your first question.
Very
Yeah.
insightful. Professor, why is the identity network lens particularly useful for understanding socially disadvantaged entrepreneurs compared to traditional identity frameworks?
Sure. So the traditional identity frameworks are very helpful in this case too, but they often examine one focal identity at a time. So if we apply a traditional identity lens or framework into this context, it will be just about how this woman will become a leader, how someone will become an entrepreneur. So entrepreneur identity will be examining isolation, like how they can just, adopt that new identity to their existing self-concept. But in most real life cases, especially in the case of the study, which is, a group of women with actually very strong existing identities that define, who they are in the first place, these identities will rarely operate in isolation. So the identity network lens will allow us to see identities as a kind of interconnected system, if I may, where identities can conflict, reinforce, or transform one another. Okay, so they can sort of change together in motion. And this is crucial because the women in our study were not just becoming entrepreneurs, sort of forcefully, insert a new identity into their self-concept. And they were actually negotiating how that aspired identity of an entrepreneur would fit together or not fit together with their existing deeply stigmatized identities they hold, like being a rural girl, not very educated. And this network lens helps explain why when you just give, money to people to start a business, when you have opportunities for them, that alone doesn't guarantee that they will actually seize the opportunities to pursue these opportunities or, go towards emancipation or empowerment of themselves, right? If existing identities remain there and in their perception still negatively sort of link to the aspire identity, they can still, not pursue this opportunity, even though it's given to them, right? So I think this lens helps us to explain why sometimes when financial resources are provided to people, they still not sort of go to pursue it because they have some existing identities that are still there to be a hurdle, and they need to resolve that internal conflicts through this identity network lens first before they can then, use the traditional network identity frameworks to pursue a new identity.
Professor, can you briefly describe how these three paths differ in terms of emotions, identity work, and inter-identity dynamics?
Yeah, so this is really the heart of the paper, and I will sort of summarize them here. So the first path we found in this research we call elevation path. It involves suppressing the disadvantaged identities in some sense. So people want to sort of forget about them, set them aside, and emotionally, this woman lean heavily towards hope, passion, excitement, a sense of determination, while pushing their fear and self-doubt aside. So it's a bit like fake it until you make it, that's what we commonly use to describe this dynamics. And identity work in this case centers on proving their competence. That's the faking it part, right? Like even though they don't really think they know anything, but they will fake that they and show that they actually do. And the sort of inter-identity relationship starts to shift. Like initially it was a conflict, right? Being a rural girl means I can absolutely not become a successful boss, right? That's in their head. There is a conflict. But through fake it until you make it, sort of elevated their self-concept, this relationship becomes sort of neutralized, meaning there's no longer a conflict, and their head, they become compatible, meaning this existing identity they have about being a rural girl would not stop themselves from becoming a successful boss. So they can coexist in their self-concept without actually sort of conflicting with each other. So that's the first. And the experimentation path, the second path we saw, involves this woman actually embracing their disadvantaged identities. So what differentiated them from the first path is that while the first path sort of suppressed them and forced themselves to forget that they have the disadvantaged backgrounds, the second path, women actually embraced their disadvantaged identity. They celebrated it, and they experienced some sort of emotional ambivalence occasionally, right? There is hope, but also mixed with self-doubt and fear. But they openly sort of unpack and process this ambivalent emotions to try to reframe the meanings they attach to their disadvantaged identities. Right. And when they do so, they gradually start to see their disadvantaged backgrounds not as a source of limitation, but as a source of strength. So a example I gave usually is a woman that says, well, because I came from rural background, I'm used to eating bitterness. That's the word they use. So meaning they can really endure hardships. And that is the sort of the character they need to have when they are pursuing sort of entrepreneurship. They see these overlaps. And here, they start to see their old disadvantaged identities as actually synergistic and helpful for them to pursue entrepreneurship and adopt this aspire identity. And finally, the third path, the entrenchment path, it actually involves this woman reinforcing the old meanings they attach to the disadvantaged identities. So negative emotions are very predominant here, like fear, shame, self-doubt. They just really experience these negative emotions intensively and could not effectively regulate them. So the existing identity become very dominant, and the aspire identity gradually becomes actually devalued and then eventually rejected by themselves. So they will come out of this process feeling that, well, it's my choice to not pursue entrepreneurship. I will very much be sort of more comfortable, actually just stay as an employee, have stable income and a stable sort of life schedule rather than having to tolerate a lot of risk. So that's the sort of a summary of the three paths that we observe in the research.
Professor, what key emotional patterns did you observe across the three paths? And how did they shape whether women pursued or abandoned their entrepreneurial aspirations?
Yeah, so among the three paths, we identify emotions really sort of emerge to be very different. The first path, a woman who experienced this elevation sort of transformation, they mostly experience very positive emotions, or at least they sort of try to exude to outsiders a very positive emotions like hope, excitement, passion, determination, right? And they are very sort of decisive in sort of they are moving towards entrepreneurship. Yeah, there is no way back. And those with emotional ambivalence were mostly in the second path. And it's very clear, like they're not just, positive throughout. Like they stay engaged, but they proceed very cautiously. And they often sort of experiment with the identity, new identity, before fully committing to it. So there's always sort of maybe like two steps up, forward, and then one step back, right? Like, or one step forward and then two steps back. So there's always a sort of dance involved between, oh, I'm feeling, motivated and I want to try and I'm confident, but then suddenly self-doubts jump in and they sort of take a step back to reflect, why do I feel these negative emotions? So that's sort of the pattern, emotional pattern we observe in the second path. And then finally, those women whose experience were dominated by intense sort of unresolved negative emotions such as fear of failure, doubt about their capabilities, they were more likely to disengage altogether at the end, and then narrate it in a way such that they sort of choose to withdraw from this engagement. So I think emotions here emerge to be not just pure reactions to an opportunities, but actually actively shaped how this woman interpret challenges And because they use their information maybe as a source of energy, as a source of information, right, that inform them, okay, like do I actually have what it takes and what resources I need to have to actually move a step forward, right? So, and it really, the emotions that they experience really actively shaped how they assess whether entrepreneurship was actually for people like them.
Dr. Winnie, how did humans' interpretations of earlier failures influence which path they took, breaking free or locking in?
Yeah, so in this research, this factor, which is their what we call retrospective sense making of their prior experiences of failure, emerge as a factor that sort of shape their initial emotions towards these entrepreneurial opportunities, which then subsequently, as I described earlier, shape their journey, right, after entering entrepreneurship. So this retrospective sense making of prior experiences of failure was actually quite important factor in our research. The women on the elevation path, what we see is that they tend to downplay or neutralize past values. Again, their objective experience of the failure may be very much similar, but when they are getting an opportunity of entrepreneurship and when they're sort of looking back and reflect on their previous experience of failure, they have different interpretations. And that different interpretations shape how they will actually take on these opportunities, right? And this first path, the woman will frame their past values as something minor or irrelevant. They wouldn't want to sort of link their previous experience of value to whether or not they should take the new opportunities. And those on the experimentation path, in their narratives, they treated past value as learning experiences. They still sort of put a lot of weight on them, but they emphasize, well, but I learned a lot from it, and that supported sort of their pursuit of entrepreneurship. And still, though, they are sort of pursuing it very cautiously. They know they still want to sort of learn, in these processes. And even though they fail, they believe they can still learn from this process. But the women who became sort of entrenched and ultimately withdraw from entrepreneurship, they interpret their past values as evidence, of that they would not be able to succeed at all, if they take on entrepreneurship. And so sort of it's kind of a additional sort of a support for their fixed limitations, for their sort of self-doubts, that it's just like, look, I fell before and I think it will just happen again. And that reinforced their beliefs that success was unlikely. So it wasn't necessarily failure itself, but how failure was subsequently interpreted when they perceive some new opportunities afterwards. And that shaped their identity trajectories, either opening up or closing down sort of new possibilities.
Professor, how did conversations with family, peers, and organizational leaders shape the identity trajectories these women followed?
Yeah, so the conversations people have with, people around us, especially those people we care about, we admire, who have some kind of influence on us, create the opportunities or a process of what I call this interpersonal sense making. So we may not really like notice it when we just have casual conversations with others, but these conversations actually shape how we interpret things, right? And that play a powerful role in this case in shaping this woman's identity trajectory. So, for example, when we see these women initially may have a very strong sense of self-doubt and really don't think they can become a successful entrepreneur. But if they somehow were able to have encouraging conversations, okay, with those around them, their mentors, their managers, their colleagues. And those conversations help these women sort of reframe their backgrounds as valuable, help this woman sort of dissolve the link right, they have put together between their disadvantaged identities and the likelihood they're going to fail, right? And these, when they have these conversations with mentors and leaders who sort of normalize emotional struggles and express confidence towards this woman, they enable this woman to reinterpret who they could be. Right? But on the other hand, right, conversations may not always be so encouraging, right? Like, and it could be conversations, for example, you may have conversations with family members and they instead of being encouraging and help them reframe the meaning of their disadvantaged identities, they may reinforce it, right? They may say, "Oh yeah, right. I mean, come on, like you have been just a girl, a mother, from a rural background. Like, how could you actually, become successful?" They may just emphasize the risk, sacrifice, or emphasize the notion of like you need to know your place. I don't do anything risky. This is quite common that we also have conversations with people who will reinforce this sort of entrenchment, right? So in short, I think, well, the conversations we have with people around us can shape, sort of whether we take on some opportunities and that lead to identity transformation or not, right? And so identity trajectories were sort of co-constructed through these everyday conversations that we have with people around us, not necessarily just something we work internally within ourselves. Yeah.
Professor, under what conditions did entrepreneurial opportunities enable emancipation versus reinforcing existing social disadvantages?
Yeah, so I think the direct insight or implications coming out from this research is that when we are offering entrepreneurship support opportunities or programs to people we think will benefit from it, right? It will enable emancipation or actually achieve the aim of such programs when these opportunities were paired with, I think, psychological support or relational support in some sense, because most of these opportunities and programs now are focusing um, mostly on giving technical support, right? Skill-based support, financial support. But I think having some emotional, psychological, and relational support will help the intended beneficiaries of these programs to rework the meanings they associate with the identities. And without that, the same opportunity could actually amplify the disadvantages this women have and make them actually feel even more doubtful about like whether they can actually do it. So I think yeah, or like sort of making this their inadequacy feel more salient or raising the sort of emotional stakes of failure. So I think the entrepreneurship opportunity or programs alone, um, although it can activate aspiration, but at the same time it could also amplify people's hesitation, right, and self-doubts, and you could only sort of support them effectively if you also provide some sort of identity support, right? So to help them overcome their internal obstacles. So I think, yeah, that will be the direct insight from this research.
Professor Winnie, how did you design your inductive qualitative study with 61 women in China? And what field moments shifted your theoretical understanding?
Yeah, so that's a great question. When I sort of reflected back on how this got started, honestly, I didn't set out to study, identity or identity transformation. When running into this context, I've just personally always been drawn to stories of people overcoming challenges to achieve something meaningful. And then when I visited family in China in 2019. Someone I know mentioned this beauty salon business that gives its employees a shot at entrepreneurship. And these employees are all women from really humble backgrounds. So, again, these backgrounds are typical, right, for people working at beauty salons. So my co-authors, I started talking to Amy, one of my co-authors, and we always wanted to do something together. And this intersection between meaning and entrepreneurial action seemed a great place, sort of to combine our interests. And So I kind of started, talking to this woman as sort of pilot interviews to explore, what they are feeling and thinking. What I expected to hear, about was how this entrepreneurial opportunity provided by their company really was great, changed their lives and so forth, so. And then in many ways it did. But what really struck me in this initial set of interviews was how much fear and self-doubt they actually carried with them, even as they were succeeding. So on the outside, it looked like amazing life-changing opportunities, but internally they were wrestling with deep emotional struggles. So as we dug deeper, I realized that a lot of these had to do with how they saw themselves, their identities, and how that sort of clashed with what they thought it meant to be an entrepreneur or a boss. So that's what really pulled me into exploring identity and entrepreneurship more seriously. So sort of a major emergent finding was realizing that even though they were given by their company, right, amazing material resources. They were given training, they were given loans, mentorships. Still, it could not explain why some women would embrace entrepreneurship and became very successful with it, while others rejected it, right? So what differentiated them, we realized, well, we need some additional explanatory factor to understand the differentiation a little bit more. And it really was how they made sense of who they were in relation to who they hope to become. And that insight is what pulled us towards identity, exploring identities and the three path model. Yeah.
Professor, what design principles would you recommend for entrepreneurial programs to address identity conflicts rather than assuming opportunities alone suffice?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, I think a direct insight from the research is that part of the programs should aim for sort of providing support for identity reconciliation or identity work. So not merely focusing on skill acquisition, technical training or financial support. But a specific sort of part of helping people sort of reconcile the identity conflict would be to, I think, normalize their emotional struggles and ambivalence. So I think the public media discourse generally portray entrepreneurship as a super exciting opportunities that, sort of the only emotions you should associate with it, you should show when you are engaging in entrepreneurship is passion. Like you need to have this passion, show passion, feel passion all the time. But in reality, many people who pursue entrepreneurship, yes, they do feel passion, but they also have negative emotions, fear, self-doubt. I think we should not just dismiss them or sort of set them aside or suppress them, but we should actually bring them out and use as resources to to teach us something about who we are. And that creates space for actually positive reinterpretation of these negative emotions. Or, what underlies this negative emotions is maybe some identities will feel as sort of not conducive to the success of entrepreneurship, but could be actually conducive. We just didn't know. So I think uh, really bringing out, normalizing, encouraging the sharing of emotional struggles will really help actually bring the biggest sort of potential of each entrepreneur.
Professor, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question.
Okay.
How do your findings on elevation, experimentation, and entrenchment apply to other forms of disadvantage and context beyond entrepreneurship?
Yeah, that's a great question. So although this paths were really sort of came out based on the context of people pursuing entrepreneurship, but I do think it can generalize to any context involving uh, aspirational like change under some kinds of hurdles internally or stigma, right? Sort of psychological obstacles. And this could include, for example, first generation professionals. Like I could think of myself. Nobody in my family was a professor. Nobody in my family even pursue sort of a secondary education beyond college. I mean, like a more advanced degrees beyond college. And when I went on to pursue my PhD, many of my peers, classmates in the PhD program, their parents were professors. And at that time, I felt, wow, like I just don't have what it takes, right? But my aspiration is to pursue academia position. And I think this model very much applies to myself. I can see me being in this actually the experimentation path, continue to struggle with sort of positive and negative emotions at the same time, but sort of still to sort of try to reframe what it means to be someone whose parents are not professors, right? And or broadly career switchers, right? People who are moving from one career path to a totally different career journey. Maybe they see a conflict, but actually it could be reframed as an opportunity or an advantage, right? And leaders, from marginalized backgrounds, who may not see themselves really fit into the prototypical sort of image of being a leaders, but they need to reconcile that sort of internal identity conflict. And even this day, so I'm looking at a lot of people who are going through the process of reskilling in the face of AI, right? And any worker, I think, who are currently going through the process of reskilling, to them, I think these three paths apply, because the previous skills they hold are very much sort of definitive of who they are. They spend years honing those skills, but right now they realize, oh, those skills are no longer relevant, right? So a really sort of salient example that came to mind is a group of dancers that I study. They spend years practicing for their craft, which is dancing, physical dancing. But right now, to actually make a living as a dancers, you need to reskill. You need to still be good at dancing, but you don't need to spend as much time actually honing that craft of dancing. And instead, you need to reskill yourself by learning how to navigate social media, how to edit their videos, how to put together the music so that it's catchy and you get a lot of views on Instagram, right? So that's a new skill set they need to acquire, which is very different from before just focusing on physical dance. And in this group, I see the three paths emerge from this research applicable as well. Many people were entrenched. They cannot see themselves just editing videos, but other people, they say, oh, no, before I was a very good dancer. I spent a lot of time practicing the physical movements, and that sort of persistence I put in practicing physical movements can also be applicable in learning about these new digital skills, and they create this connection. So yeah, I can see this very much applicable, in any time when people aspire to become somebody associate with sort of very different set of meanings while carrying identities marked by some disadvantages, hurdles, challenges. They will face similar internal negotiations. And I think our framework will help to explain why some would break free while others actually lock in, often despite equivalent sort of external opportunities or resources. Yeah.
Dr. Winnie Jiang, your research beautifully illuminates the internal struggles that accompany external opportunities. As organizations and policymakers increasingly invest in entrepreneurial and development programs, your work reminds us that breaking the cycle of disadvantage requires attending not just to resources and access, but to the deeper emotional and identity work individuals undertake. Thank you for sharing this profound insight with us today. Thank you once again.
Thank you.